Chapter 2, A New Life Awaits, Going Off to College. Shy and Uncertain Choices. When I think about this time, I realize how little preparation was offered to us as high school students. I was choosing to enter an engineering school without any idea about whether that was a good match for me. I had not thought about the activities performed by an engineer. I had not considered alternative activities available in other professions that would better match my personality, my interests, desires, goals, values, or motivations. Growing up, I always knew that I was going to go off to college one day. I surely knew this as far back as elementary school. My parents encouraged me, beginning in 6th or 7th grade, to join the band so that I would have extracurricular activities which would help me get into a good college. I think that being in the band was seen as an extracurricular activity that even a shy person like me could do. I'm not sure what the thinking was on that. I had been retreating into the proverbial shell that characterized the life of a shy person. I was becoming something of a ghost or invisible. I wasn't very assertive. It's interesting that the most valuable things that I learned in college came from psychology. I was an engineering major. That was all I knew when I set off for college. Unfortunately, at my high school, they did not offer anyone any guidance in high school to help them decide what is a good match for them to study in college. That would have been possible, and in many TV shows I have seen this happening. My father was an engineer, but as much as I wanted to impress my parents and be recognized, I don't think I was trying to emulate my father in terms of a career direction. I did want to and expected that someday I would live in a nice home like we had growing up, and I would have a wife and children. It's also interesting to note that I never remembered my parents telling me what they thought would be a good career direction for me and what they expected, just that I would go to college. I had no idea how that was going to happen for me. I had trouble meeting people, making friends. I never dated. I selected the Georgia Institute of Technology, Georgia Tech in Atlanta, because I thought I wanted to be an engineer, and I had heard that Georgia Tech was a prestigious engineering school. All the colleges to which I was accepted were far from where I grew up and had been living. This caused me some concern because I would be leaving behind a place that was familiar to me and where I had friends and an extended family. I felt comfortable with my extended family, including my aunt and cousins. I liked them. I liked seeing them as often as possible. I wasn't sure I would be able to make friends far away at college. I had virtually no social skills, and I was very shy. I would end up building a career around helping others with problems or issues like shyness, as well as emotional and psychological issues or problems. I didn't want to leave and go so far away. My friend Paul had moved out of the neighborhood, and I wasn't hanging out with him as much, so the only sense of comfort came from my extended family. Paul and I had been best friends, but when he had moved, we drifted apart. It seemed like nothing lasts in life. I felt lonely when I went off to college. It was late August when we drove from Southington, Connecticut, all the way to Atlanta, Georgia, in the campus of Georgia Tech. We were arriving early for orientation before classes begin. Parents are invited to join the students for orientation. The South overall is much less populated than the North, but Georgia Tech is situated nearly in the center of the city of Atlanta, Georgia. I had grown up in a small town that had a population of roughly 30,000, and now I was in a city with a metropolitan population of about 5 million. To call this a culture shock would be an understatement. I felt a mixture of pride and fear as we turned into the campus. Dad was driving and Mom was sitting in the front seat next to him. My sister, Carrie, and my brother John were back at home in Southington. Carrie was in high school now. We were looking for the student center. The first things we saw were some athletic fields in the basketball stadium. Then we came across the fraternity houses. I just knew that this was what we were seeing. They all had 3 Greek letters on the outside. There were a few sororities too, but I know that males outnumber females by a ratio of more than 2 to 1 at engineering schools. That's okay, I was too shy to date. Maybe I would get to know some girls. Maybe college would be different. I guess I wasn't thinking that it would be far more challenging to meet a girl than to date when one attends a university where males outnumber females by a ratio of 2 to 1. In the back of my mind, I had been thinking that, as an adult, I would also want to form a family. And so that would involve dating. That was part of the life plan that I had. I noticed how Georgia Tech fits into downtown Atlanta like a small, hidden, or forbidden community within a larger city that was filled with traffic, skyscrapers, and a huge metropolitan area. Yep, this was going to be a very new experience for me. For the most part, as part of orientation, they separate the parents from the new kids, the incoming freshmen. I'm not sure what the thinking was on that. The parents were about to leave and go back home. I was thinking that perhaps having parents attend orientation was pointless. They would be going back home soon. I could feel how different this was from what I had known in life. It was unfamiliar. Don't get me wrong, growing up, there were not many rules during high school. I can't think of a rule, come to think of it. I didn't have a curfew, I just had to be home for dinner. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, I had known for many years I was going to go to college after high school. I was encouraged to save money for this, but from a practical standpoint, it was obvious that most of the cost of my education would be paid for by mom and dad. That included tuition, books, and various living expenses. The idea that one could be a full-time student at Georgia Tech and have a job didn't seem like something that would be expected of me. Now I would be completely on my own. I was about to discover how great that would be. During orientation, there were daily activities, forced activities. Like the first day we went rafting on the Chattahoochee River, and I suppose the goal was to help us to start to connect to others. When I say we went rafting, I mean I went with other incoming freshmen. I don't know what the parents were doing. You don't have to travel far to get out of the city with the skyscrapers and find yourself in the country where you could go rafting. That's where I really felt like a misfit. I tried so hard to connect. It seemed like the others were talking to each other and connecting, but I could never think of anything to say to anyone at any time. That left me with a constant feeling of being different. I am describing this so you, dear reader, will understand that what shyness is like for me. I was thinking that if I appeared different, then it would become increasingly more difficult to connect because I imagined there would be more time for people to notice that I was different. I wasn't scared or nervous, but nothing was coming to mind to say. I felt a sense of urgency to speak, to seem normal. I wanted to make connections and make friends in this new environment. That meant I wanted to appear to be normal and just like everyone else. So I felt an urgency to connect right away. I didn't want much time to pass by where people might start thinking something's like, what's wrong with that guy? He doesn't speak to anyone. He has nothing to say. Yes, that was exactly what was going through my mind. I didn't want to stand out as a misfit, an outsider. It seemed like such a person is viewed negatively, and it makes it harder to later appear to be normal and to fit in. As part of this orientation, both parents and the incoming students were told a truth that everyone needed to understand. Not everyone who gets admitted to Georgia Tech is going to graduate. We were told to look at the person to our left, then the person to our right. One of you will graduate. You don't have to spell it out. 2 out of 3 of us would flunk out. Hearing this, I didn't feel any different. I felt like the weight of this challenge had been there in the back of my mind for some time. I felt a bit frightened, but it was about something more than the classes. I could not imagine what the classes would be like yet. My fear was about appearing as an outsider and a misfit. In high school, I was invisible, like a ghost. I'd come here and would be alone. I didn't want that to happen. I was scared of loneliness. I wanted to connect. During these activities, everything seemed so much easier for everyone else. So often my thoughts were preoccupied with the fact that I couldn't find anything to say. I watched others, observed, and it seemed like things were easier for others. I didn't have social skills. That much was true. I wonder if there was a way to get help for my problems. It was then that I realized something powerful and important. I was in control of things going forward. I could make things different for me. I was free. It might be reasonable to wonder why I had not gotten counseling for my shyness and social anxiety long ago. Maybe it was too embarrassing for me to talk to mom and dad about it. Even before I found out about services that might be available to students, I imagined that they must have some kind of counseling center. How did I know that? Now I was on my own. I wouldn't have to explain what I was doing or where I was going to mom and dad. They would not be going to that to be present. I was on my own. The freedom felt slightly soothing. I couldn't share with my mother and father the shame that I had been feeling because of my shyness and lack of social skills. Just as it was when I was growing up, this was too embarrassing to discuss with mom and dad. I didn't know what the experience was like for mom and dad. They didn't convey much of what they experienced. They said their goodbyes and good luck. Now, during orientation, making friends, connecting seemed like a matter of survival. I had a sense of that failure academically here at Georgia Tech for me meant failure in life. Evening fell hard each day with the weight of my isolation echoing through my mind. Everyone else was doing something. If anyone saw me all alone, pacing the halls of the dorm, what would they think? Growing up, I had some friends and neighbors and felt somewhat comfortable with them. I had my cousins and my aunt. Now I had to make connections. On the second day after arrival, I was feeling an overwhelming need to just do something. I felt like more than one day had passed, and the weight of isolation had been so heavy. I couldn't face another night pacing the halls, walking past the vending machines, the TV room. It was so quiet, and I felt so alone and scared. Now that night we were having a barbecue with hot dogs and hamburgers on the grill. I had to try to socialize. I noticed this guy who seemed approachable. There were only the two of them. I could handle that. Just move close and act calm. I felt awkward and hoped it didn't show. They were talking about going to fraternity parties. Do you mind if I join you? I asked. Good job, I thought. I was direct and I confronted my fear of rejection. Before long we were walking off to a few of the frat houses. We stopped at a couple of frat houses that night, and then the next night we did the same thing, ending up at Zeta Beta Tau fraternity. This was rush week when the fraternities recruit new members, new pledges. I felt different here at ZBT. When we visited any frat house, they all tried to make us feel special. But I just liked this place. The guys that I came with had been socializing with different people at the house. I couldn't dance and did my best to avoid the big room where they did that. I would move about with surprising ease in other rooms and outside the frat house. Mainly I was listening. I let the frat brothers do the talking. They did love bombing. That's the word for it. I knew they were making us feel special as a recruitment strategy, and yet it was helpful. I met one person after another who sold me what we needed to do. Johnny was really friendly and relatable. Danny was cool in an unusual way. Stu was a cook, and he looked, well, almost like he was high. How the heck could he do that and be a chemical engineer? I had the idea that this was what I should do. I needed to make friends and a connection, and nothing like this had happened to me in such a short period of time. Every once in a while they would ring a bell and cheer when someone declares their intent to pledge the fraternity. It took so much effort for me to find the courage to tell someone that I would pledge. I was dreading the event, when I would be the center of attention. I realized that this wouldn't last for long before they move on to the next person. Still, I had never made myself the center of attention. Well, I had to get this over with, right? I put my mind to it and went with the flow. I told this guy named Pat, who was standing next to Stu, and they cheered and rang the bell. I knew that I didn't want this, so I had to force myself to do it, knowing that if I thought about it, I wouldn't do it. It was amazing how fast things changed. The moment when they are cheering and focused on me only lasted a few moments, and then it was over. After Rush Week, my first week at college. Things changed after Rush, and classes were getting started. Suddenly, you have been transformed from the person who was treated like they are so special to being treated like a lowly pledge. I don't mean they did anything bad. It's just that the dynamics changed. As a pledge, there are things you have to do. This will culminate in a final initiation when we finally become members of the fraternity. We were given a pledge paddle early, and you are required to wear a suit or jacket and tie to classes for part of the period. You are expected to show up at the frat house every day and kneel down holding your paddle up to ask for permission to enter in a ritualistic fashion. It was out in the open, so it wasn't hazing or anything nefarious. I just felt embarrassed. I didn't want to be the center of attention anywhere, so I would dress normally for classes, then not bring my paddle to classes like everyone else, but I would get it at the end of the day when I was expected to show up at the frat house. I would be sneaky and break the rules or expectations about what we were supposed to do when I was going to class and otherwise on campus. I couldn't imagine any punishment if I was caught. Growing up, the only rules or expectations had to do with the needs or desires of our parents. We did all our studying and homework at the frat house unless we had to do something on the mainframe computer stations, or if there were reasons to be elsewhere for study groups or lab work. Toward the end of the quarter, we had initiation, where we would become full members of the fraternity. The fraternity made this somewhat mysterious, and we had assignments to complete in groups. It was actually good for team building and connecting as a group together. You might have seen some movie that tries to depict a fraternity initiation. Take an oldie like Animal House, where the pledges bend over and are hit with a paddle and answer, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" Nothing like that happened. We learned a secret handshake. Some might call my book a tell-all book. The term is popular these days. While I'm not going to be evasive in the book about embarrassing or emotional matters, that doesn't mean I'm going to tell you everything, dear reader. I am fine with keeping innocent secrets about matters that are unimportant to my story and that include details about the initiation. So that was an overview of a few things that characterized my first quarter at Georgia Tech. These were the first few months of my adult life on my own. Life already seemed better than I had known early in life. There are a few things that I left out. In the next chapter, where I use the cliche boy meets girl in the name of the chapter, I will introduce some of the other things I was learning about how to make connections.